Within the massive walls of the Vatican, in the shadow of the majestic St. Peter's Basilica, lies one of the most mysterious places on earth, the Vatican's secret archives. These ancient repositories, extending deep underground, inspire awe even in the most skeptical researchers. Among the countless manuscripts and documents collected here over 2 millennia, legends say there is a special collection, the so-called Books of the Sibyls, ancient prophetesses endowed with the gift of foresight, left behind mysterious texts predicting the fate of civilizations and the future of humanity. Roman emperors consulted these scrolls during critical moments in history, and early Christian theologians saw in the Sibyls' pronouncements omens of Christ's coming. But what happened to these ancient prophecies after the fall of Rome? Did the Catholic Church truly secretly preserve these texts? And if so, what revelations about our future might be hidden in the depths of the Vatican catacombs, where only the chosen few are allowed? In the ancient world, Sibyls held a special place among prophets and soothsayers. These enigmatic women, endowed with the gift of foresight, are mentioned in the texts of the greatest minds of antiquity. Virgil, in his 4th eclogue, addresses the Cumaean Sibyl, who foretells the advent of a new golden age. Tacitus describes how Roman rulers in times of crisis turned to their prophecies. Plutarch, in turn, elaborates on encounters with these mysterious seers. Ancient tradition identifies 10 most significant Sibyls, each associated with a specific region of the ancient world. The most famous is the Cumaean Sibyl, who lived in caves near Naples. It was she, according to legend, who offered the Roman king Tarquin the Proud to purchase 9 books of prophecies. When he refused due to the high price, the prophetess burned 3 books and offered the remaining ones for the same sum. After a second refusal, she destroyed 3 more books, and only then did the ruler agree to buy the last 3 scrolls for the original price. In the East, the Persian and Chaldean Sibyls were revered, their prophecies linked to the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia. The Delphic Sibyl was considered the daughter of Apollo himself and rivaled the Pythia in authority. The Erythraean Sibyl predicted the Trojan War, and the Samian foretold the birth of Jesus. The peculiarity of the Sibyls was that they were revered in almost all cultures of the Mediterranean. Unlike other oracles tied to specific temples, Sibyls were wandering prophetesses. They spoke in a state of ecstatic trance, often incoherently and mysteriously, and their words were written on palm leaves, which the wind scattered in different directions. Historical sources describe Sibyls as women of advanced age, living in seclusion, often in caves or grottos. Their lifestyle was ascetic, and the gift of prophecy was considered both a blessing and a curse. According to legend, the Cumaean Sibyl asked Apollo for as many years of life as grains of sand she could hold in her hand, but forgot to ask for eternal youth. Thus, she was doomed to endless aging until she shriveled to a size that allowed her to be placed in a suspended jar. The legend of the Sibylline Books' appearance in ancient Rome begins with a remarkable episode dating back to the 6th century BC. One day, a strange old woman appeared before King Tarquinius Superbus, offering to sell him 9 scrolls of prophecies. The price named by the prophetess seemed excessively high to the ruler, and he refused. In response, the woman burned 3 books right before his eyes and offered the remaining 6 for the same sum. Receiving a second refusal, she destroyed 3 more books. Only then did Tarquinius, shaken by her determination, agree to buy the last 3 scrolls for the original price. Thus, the Sibylline Books entered the sacred life of Rome, becoming one of the pillars of the state religion. After the expulsion of the kings and the establishment of the Republic, these mysterious texts were placed in a special repository beneath the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Access to them was strictly limited. Only a special college of priests, known as the Quindecimviri, could interpret their content, and then only by special order of the Senate. Romans consulted the Sibylline Books during moments of serious crisis. During epidemics, natural disasters, military defeats, or strange omens. It was believed that these scrolls contained instructions for appeasing the gods in any critical situation. It was based on the interpretation of the Sibylline Books that many cults and rites were introduced in Rome, including the worship of Apollo, Ceres, and Dionysus. When, in 204 BC, Hannibal threatened the very existence of the Republic, recourse to the Sibyl's prophecies led to the introduction of the cult of the Great Mother of the Gods from Asia Minor. A tragic fate befell the original Sibylline Books in 83 BC. During the civil war between Marius and Sulla, a devastating fire engulfed the Capitoline Hill. The sacred texts, stored there for almost 400 years, were irretrievably lost. This loss was perceived by the Romans as a national catastrophe and a bad omen. With the spread of Christianity, the ancient prophecies of the Sibyls found new life, transformed through the prism of nascent theology. Early Christian thinkers, many of whom received a classical education, did not reject the pagan prophetesses. On the contrary, they saw in them precursors of Christian truth. Thus was born the remarkable phenomenon of the Christian reception of the Sibylline oracles, which became a bridge between ancient wisdom and the new faith. In the first centuries CE, a corpus of texts known as the Sibylline Oracles appeared, a collection of prophecies created in Jewish and Christian circles but attributed to ancient prophetesses. These texts, written in Greek hexameter, skillfully intertwined biblical motifs with the traditional form of Sibylline prophecies. In them, the Sibyls foretold the coming of the Messiah, condemned idolatry, and predicted the end of the world in terms consonant with Christian doctrine. It is particularly noteworthy that the Church Fathers not only did not reject these texts as forgeries, but actively used them in their apologetics. Lactantius, a Christian writer of the early 4th century, quotes the Sibyls more than 50 times in his Divine Institutions, finding in their utterances predictions about the birth, life, and resurrection of Christ. He believed that God granted the pagan prophetesses a true vision of the future to prepare the world for the coming of the Savior. Even an intellectual giant like Augustine of Hippo recognized the authority of the Sibyls. In his monumental work, The City of God, he analyzes the acrostic of the Erythraean Sibyl, in which the initial letters of the lines spell out the phrase, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. For Augustine, this was undeniable proof that God spoke through the Sibyls, even to those who did not know the Scriptures. Gradually, the images of the Sibyls permeated Christian art. In the frescoes of the catacombs, in the mosaics of basilicas, and later, in the sculptural decoration of Gothic cathedrals, the prophetesses were depicted alongside biblical prophets. Michelangelo immortalized 5 Sibyls on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, thereby emphasizing their status recognized by the Church. The Vatican Apostolic Library is one of the most impressive book collections in human history. Its foundation is officially dated to 1453, when Pope Nicholas V combined disparate papal manuscript collections. However, the library's origins go much deeper, to the first centuries of Christianity, when an archive of church documents was being formed at the Lateran Palace. Under the vaults of the Vatican are preserved over 1.5 million printed books, 80,000 manuscripts, and 100,000 engravings and maps. Among them are the oldest copies of the Bible, including the famous 4th century Vatican Codex, unique manuscripts by ancient authors, and medieval illuminated manuscripts. It is critically important to distinguish between two institutions often conflated in popular culture: the Vatican Apostolic Library and the Vatican Secret Archives, now renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archive. The library was originally created as a collection of texts for study, a kind of research center. The archives, on the other hand, were formed as a repository for the administrative documents of the Holy See, bulls, encyclicals, diplomatic correspondence. The word "0" in the archive's name causes much speculation, but in this context, it comes from the Latin secretum, meaning private or personal, that is, belonging personally to the pontiff. This is an administrative, not a conspiratorial, definition. Access to the materials of the library and archive is strictly regulated, but by no means completely closed. Serious researchers with academic degrees and recommendations from academic institutions can apply to work with the documents. After verification and approval, they receive a special pass, valid for a certain period. Among the famous scholars who worked in the Vatican repositories are Leopold von Ranke, who laid the foundations of modern historical science, Ludwig von Pastor, who created the monumental History of the Popes, and many others. In the 20th century, access to the archives gradually expanded, especially after the Second Vatican Council, when the Church adopted a policy of greater openness. The Vatican's secret archives are shrouded in numerous myths, which have transformed them in the public imagination into a repository of mystical secrets and forbidden knowledge. However, reality, as is often the case, is both more prosaic and more fascinating than fiction. Let's start with the name itself: Archivum Secretum Vaticanum. The word "here" comes from the Latin secretum, which is more accurately translated as or "This is the administrative archive of the pontiff, not a collection of occult manuscripts." It is for this reason that in 2019, Pope Francis officially renamed the institution the Vatican Apostolic Archive, acknowledging that the previous name gave rise to unnecessary speculation. This step was part of a long process of gradually opening the archives to the academic community. Another common myth is the idea of underground labyrinths extending for kilometers into the depths. In reality, the archival premises occupy about 85 kilometers of shelving, located in several buildings. An impressive figure, but far from the fantastical notions of endless catacombs. The process of declassifying archival holdings significantly accelerated under Pope Leo XIII, who in 1881 first widely opened the archives to researchers of all nationalities and faiths. John Paul II continued this policy, making available documents from the pontificate of Pius XI, including controversial materials about the Vatican's relations with Nazi Germany. In 2020, after many years of preparatory work, the archives of the pontificate of Pius XII were opened, an era of World War II that generates the greatest historical debate. This decision by Pope Francis was an important step in transparency policy. Working in the archive requires solid academic training. Only researchers with academic degrees, letters of recommendation, and a clearly formulated research topic are admitted. Approximately 60 specialists from around the world work daily in the reading rooms. They do not have direct access to the repositories. The necessary documents are delivered by archivists upon prior request. Among the truly interesting materials in the archive are a letter from Michelangelo, Henry VIII's petition for the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, documents from Galileo's trial, and correspondence with rulers of various eras. These historical testimonies are gradually becoming available to scholarship, dispelling the mist of mystifications but preserving the genuine intellectual and cultural significance of the Vatican archives. The search for traces of the legendary Sibylline Books in the Vatican has become a true intellectual odyssey for many researchers of the 19th and 20th centuries. The archival catalogues of the Vatican Library contain numerous manuscripts related to prophecies, but there are no direct indications of the original Sibylline texts within them. However, indirect evidence compels scholars to return to these searches again and again. The German historian Theodor Mommsen, working in the Vatican archives in the 1850s, discovered several medieval manuscripts with fragments of the so-called Sibylline oracles, Judeo-Christian texts attributed to ancient prophetesses. His notes mention a mysterious 12th century codex containing a compilation of prophecies with marginal annotations, presumably made by Vatican librarians of the Renaissance era. The English researcher Charles Alexander, who gained access to the archives in 1923, focused on the collection of Cardinal Angelo Mai, an outstanding philologist of the 19th century known for discovering lost texts by ancient authors. In his diaries, Alexander mentions a mysterious document from Mai's collection, catalogued as Vaticanus Graecus 2146, a palimpsest with a barely discernible lower layer of text containing passages stylistically resembling ancient oracles. Of particular interest are the records of Cardinal Giuseppe Garampi, the chief archivist of the Vatican in the 18th century. In his personal diary, discovered only in the 20th century, he mentions a secret room behind the Sistine Chapel library, where texts of particular delicacy, including prophecies not intended for the general public, were allegedly stored. In the 2000s, the Italian researcher Maria Croce drew attention to unusual coincidences in the cataloging of some ancient manuscripts. She put forward the hypothesis of a special encryption system in old catalogs that could indicate the location of texts related to the Sibyls. Her work attracted the attention of cryptography specialists, but has not yet led to concrete discoveries. The American historian David Stanley in 2015 received permission to study archival documents from the pontificate of Leo X, a humanist pope known for his interest in ancient texts. In the papal correspondence, Stanley discovered mentions of ancient prophecies, transferred to the Vatican from the Medici Library in Florence. However, further traces of these documents are lost in the labyrinth of archival records. From the mists of time, only scattered fragments of the Sibylline prophecies have reached us. Like shards of an ancient mirror, they reflect only a fraction of the knowledge possessed by the legendary prophetesses. The most significant quotes have been preserved in the works of Roman historians, Varro, whose commentaries reached us through Lactantius, and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, who meticulously described the rituals of consulting the sacred books. Fragments cited by Phlegon of Tralles, personal secretary to Emperor Hadrian, who compiled a collection of fulfilled Sibylline prophecies, are of particular value. His work, On Marvels, includes a prediction of an earthquake in Lycia, astonishingly accurately describing the catastrophe of the 125th year. Medieval authors also preserved many quotes, though their authenticity is more questionable. The Benedictine monk Rabanus Maurus in the 9th century compiled a collection of prophecies, supposedly stemming from the original Sibylline texts. modern researchers have made several serious attempts to reconstruct the lost books. The work of German philologist Hermann Diels' Sibylline Leaves, published in 1890, became the first scientific approach to restoring the original texts. By analyzing the metrics, archaisms, and stylistic features of the preserved fragments, Diels separated the oldest layers from later accretions. American historian David Potter, in his work Sibyls and Sibylline Prophecies in Classical Antiquity, proposed a method for reconstructing the context of lost passages based on historical events that followed the consultation of the books. By comparing the prophecies with real events, scholars have discovered astonishing coincidences. Many associate the prediction of a man from the east who will come with fire with the invasion of Mithridates and the enigmatic prophecy of 3 rulers of Rome who will fall by their own power, accurately describes the fate of the triumvirs. However, skeptics point to the well-known phenomenon of retrospective interpretation, where vague formulations are imbued with specific meaning after events have occurred. Be that as it may, fragments of the Sibylline books remain one of the most mysterious documents of antiquity, and their possible existence in the secret vaults of the Vatican continues to excite the minds of researchers and lovers of mysteries. The Vatican's official stance on end times prophecies has always been characterized by restraint and caution. The Catholic Church, upholding a 2,000-year tradition, has developed a complex and nuanced position on eschatology, the doctrine concerning the ultimate destiny of the world. Unlike the apocalyptic movements that periodically emerge on the periphery of Christianity, the official Vatican avoids specific predictions of the end of the world's date, citing the gospel words that, "About that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." This theological caution also extends to the attitude towards the Sibylline prophecies. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the modern embodiment of the former Inquisition, has never officially recognized the authenticity of specific apocalyptic prophecies attributed to the Sibyls. However, it is noteworthy that the Church has not entirely rejected the possibility of true prophetic gifts existing among pagan seers. Catholic theology allows that God could act through chosen individuals even outside the chosen people, a concept known as seeds of the Logos. Nevertheless, history shows that the Vatican has for centuries exercised careful control over apocalyptic literature. The first index of forbidden books, compiled in 1559, included many texts with prophecies and visions of the end of the world that circulated in medieval Europe. The Church was particularly strict about writings that predicted specific dates for the apocalypse or contained criticism of the papacy. The famous case of Joachim of Fiore, a 12th century monk whose prophecies about the coming of the Age of the Holy Spirit sparked mass movements, illustrates the dual nature of the Church's position. Joachim himself died in peace with the Church, but his followers were condemned as heretics. Historical documents attest to the existence of a special department in the Vatican Library dedicated to collecting and analyzing prophetic texts. This practice, begun under Pope Sixtus IV in the 15th century, continues to this day. According to some accounts, it is there that fragments related to the Sibylline prophecies may have been stored. Hidden deep within popular imagination and historical tradition lies the legend of the mysterious Sibylline Codex, a hypothetical book of prophecies supposedly kept in the most secret sections of the Vatican archive. This myth, adorned with numerous details, has an astonishingly long history rooted in the Middle Ages. The first mentions of a unified compendium of all Sibylline prophecies appear in 13th century chronicles, where it speaks of a great book of foreknowledge, allegedly saved from the burning capital by an unknown priest. According to this legend, the manuscript was secretly passed down from generation to generation until it came into the hands of Pope Sylvester II, a pontiff from the turn of the first millennium, known for his extensive knowledge and interest in ancient sciences. It is with his name that the first placement of the codex in the papal library is associated. The myth of the Sibylline Codex gained particular popularity during the Renaissance, when interest in ancient heritage reached its peak. The Florentine humanist Marsilio Ficino, in his correspondence, mentions a great book of prophecies, supposedly seen by him during a visit to the Vatican. He describes it as an ancient tome with golden clasps, covered in writings in an unknown language, interspersed with mysterious symbols. In the 17th century, the legend received new development thanks to the Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, one of the greatest polymaths of his time. In his treatise, Oedipus Egyptiacus, he alludes to the existence in the Vatican of a compendium of all prophecies, containing predictions until the end of time. It is noteworthy that Kircher had access to the secret sections of the Vatican Library and enjoyed the patronage of several popes. In the modern era, the myth has transformed into popular conspiracy theories. Dan Brown and other best-selling authors have turned the Sibylline Codex into a literary trope, a secret document containing prophecies about the fall of the Catholic Church or the end of the world. However, serious researchers are skeptical of these legends. Professor Anthony Grafton of Columbia University, one of the leading specialists in the history of books and reading, notes, "The myth of a single Sibylline Codex contradicts everything we know about the historical fate of Sibylline texts. The original books perished in the fire of the capital, and subsequent compilations were always disparate and fragmentary." The history of papal prophecies is closely intertwined with the enigmatic legacy of the Sibylline Books, forming one of the most intriguing layers of Vatican mysteries. Among these predictions, a special place is held by the so-called Prophecy of Malachi, a text that appeared in the 16th century and is attributed to a 12th century Irish archbishop. It contains a list of short Latin mottos supposedly describing all future popes until the end of time. Surprisingly, many of these symbolic descriptions actually correspond to pontiffs of subsequent centuries. For example, Pope Pius VI is called Apostolic Wanderer, and indeed he was forced to leave Rome under pressure from Napoleon's troops. John Paul II is designated as De Labore Solis, from the labor of the sun, and he was born during a solar eclipse. Philological analysis of the text reveals striking parallels with the language and style of the Sibylline oracles, especially in the use of symbolic imagery and metaphors. Some researchers suggest that the author of the prophecy may have had access to fragments of genuine Sibylline books stored in the Vatican. No less mysterious are the visions of Pope Pius X, canonized in 1954. Shortly before his death in 1914, he described an apocalyptic vision in which a successor to the pontiff with the same name will leave Rome over the corpses of his priests. Many saw this as a prediction of the Second World War, which fell during the pontificate of Pius XII. The Vatican itself has never officially recognized the authenticity of these prophecies, but neither has it completely rejected them. Archival documents indicate that at critical moments in history, the highest church hierarchs turned to these texts. During World War II, Cardinal Eugene Tisserand, prefect of the Vatican Library, spent several weeks studying ancient prophecies, including fragments attributed to the Sibyls. The results of his research were presented to Pope Pius XII in a sealed envelope, the contents of which remain unknown to this day. In the 21st century, the search for traces of the Sibylline Books has gained new impetus, thanks to innovative research methods and an interdisciplinary approach. Modern scholars have armed themselves not only with classical philology and historical methods, but also with advanced digital technologies, allowing them to peer into areas previously inaccessible. Dr. Elisa Martini, a paleographer from the University of Bologna, in 2017 applied multispectral imaging to a number of Vatican palimpsests. This technology, originally developed for space research, allowed for the discovery of hidden texts beneath later entries. In one 10th century manuscript, fragments stylistically resembling prophetic texts of the Hellenistic period were identified. Professor Thomas Anderson from Princeton University led a project to create a digital database of all known citations from the Sibylline Books, scattered throughout the works of ancient and medieval authors. Using machine learning algorithms, his team identified linguistic patterns characteristic of authentic fragments, which allowed them to distinguish these from later imitations. Of particular interest was an international study led by Professor Giovanni Rossi from the Vatican School of Paleography. With the permission of ecclesiastical authorities, a group of scholars catalogued previously unsystematized archival materials related to the activities of Cardinal Angelo Mai in the 19th century. In the cardinal's personal correspondence, mentions of ancient prophetic texts of Greek origin were discovered, transferred to a special repository by order of Pope Gregory XVI. It is noteworthy that modern research extends beyond purely textological searches. An archaeological expedition led by Dr. Maria Contreras in 2019 discovered the remains of an underground sanctuary with papyrus fragments in the vicinity of ancient Cumae. Preliminary analysis showed that the texts date back to the 1st century BCE and contain excerpts of ritual formulas, possibly related to the cult of the Sibyl. The theological aspect of the research is represented by the works of Monsignor Paolo Benedetti, an employee of the Pontifical Biblical Institute. His comparative analysis of early Christian texts and fragments of the Sibylline oracles revealed surprising parallels in eschatological concepts. According to Benedetti, this may indicate the existence of a common source, possibly stemming from lost, authentic prophecies. The world of popular culture has spawned numerous fantastic theories about the Vatican and its secret archives. Films, books, and video games depict the Catholic Church as the custodian of esoteric knowledge capable of changing humanity's destiny. Conspiracy theorists paint a picture of an omnipotent Vatican hiding Sibylline prophecies of an impending apocalypse. However, when confronted with a scientific approach, these captivating narratives crumble like a house of cards. Dan Brown's novel Angels and Demons popularized the idea of secret laboratories beneath the Vatican where ancient prophecies are deciphered. The video game Assassin's Creed presented an alternative history where the papacy has guarded artifacts with predictions of the future for centuries. TV series like The Da Vinci Code Legacy exploit the image of secret societies within the Church controlling access to Sibylline prophecies. These works of fiction create a distorted perception of reality, which then infiltrates the mass consciousness. Methodologically, the problem of researching historical mysteries lies on several planes. Firstly, there's the uncritical acceptance of secondary sources. Conspiracy theorists often cite each other, creating the illusion of multiple confirmations in the absence of primary evidence. Secondly, there's selectivity in working with facts. Only evidence that confirms a preconceived position is chosen. Thirdly, There's the conflation of historical eras and contexts. Ancient texts are interpreted through the lens of modern perceptions. The example of the so-called, quote, three is illustrative. Conspiracy theorists claim that the archives contain a cipher that allows hidden messages in Sibylline prophecies to be read. However, historical documents indicate that the texts themselves were written in ordinary ancient Greek, without any cryptographic elements. The myth of the code arose in the 19th century when occult societies became interested in gematria, the Kabbalistic practice of numerical interpretation of words. Media distortions play a key role in shaping modern perceptions of Vatican secrets. Sensational headlines attract more attention than balanced scientific articles. Documentaries, claiming objectivity, often dramatize material for ratings. Social networks spread unverified information at a speed inaccessible to academic refutations. A scientific approach requires acknowledging a simple truth. The absence of proof of something's existence is not proof of its non-existence. But it also cannot serve as a basis for claims of its existence. Historical science is built on documentary evidence, not on emotionally appealing hypotheses. Ancient prophecies always teeter on the fine line between mystification and truth. How does one interpret texts written millennia ago in the context of modernity? This question becomes particularly relevant when discussing predictions of the future that might have been contained in the legendary Sibylline Books. Modern hermeneutics, the science of text interpretation, offers several methodological approaches to working with prophetic writings. Firstly, it is necessary to consider the historical context of the text's creation. Sibyl's prophecies emerged in a specific cultural environment, reflecting the fears, hopes, and beliefs of their time. Secondly, it's crucial to understand the language and symbolism of the era. Many images obvious to contemporaries today require a deep immersion into ancient semiotics. Thirdly, one should distinguish between literal and allegorical interpretations. The French researcher Jean Dorez, who dedicated his life to studying ancient prophecies, notes, "The psychological aspect of belief in prophecies is no less interesting." The Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung viewed prophetic texts as a manifestation of the collective unconscious, a repository of archetypes and images common to all humanity. In his opinion, genuine prophecies resonate with deep psychic structures, which explains their universal allure. Sociologists point to a pattern. Interest in prophecies sharply increases during periods of crisis and uncertainty. At such times, people seek support in timeless wisdom, capable of explaining the chaos of the present and offering hope for the future. It's no surprise that after world wars, economic crises, and pandemics, publications about the Sibylline Books became bestsellers. In this context, the Vatican's role as a guardian of ancient knowledge gains particular significance. For centuries, the Church has balanced between acknowledging the Sibyl's prophetic gift and caution regarding specific predictions. This approach reflects a fundamental principle of Catholic theology. The future is in God's hands, and although some of its aspects may be revealed to the chosen, complete knowledge is inaccessible to mortals. Concluding our journey through the labyrinths of Vatican secrets and ancient prophecies, we find ourselves before an eternal question. What lies hidden behind the legend of the Sibylline Library? The scientific community is divided into two camps. Skeptics point to the absence of direct evidence for the existence of the original texts in the Vatican archives. They remind us that the authentic Sibylline books perished in the fire of the Capitol in 83 BC, and subsequent compilations were merely attempts to restore lost knowledge. Enthusiasts, however, draw attention to circumstantial evidence, archival anomalies, and strange coincidences that are difficult to explain by simple chance. Perhaps the truth, as often happens, lies somewhere in the middle. Even if the original scrolls have not survived, their echoes might have reached us through numerous copies, commentaries, and interpretations. Modern science does not stand still. New methods of dating, spectral analysis, and digital text reconstruction open up unprecedented opportunities for researchers. What seemed impossible to decipher yesterday may become accessible tomorrow, thanks to technological breakthroughs. The recent decision by the Vatican to rename the Secret Archive to the Apostolic Archive and expand access to its holdings offers hope that even more historical mysteries will be unraveled in the coming decades. At the same time, it is important to maintain a balance between scientific skepticism and respect for ancient traditions. The prophecies of the Sibyls, regardless of their physical existence in the Vatican archives, remain an important part of humanity's cultural heritage. They reflect humanity's eternal desire to peer behind the veil of the future, to understand its destiny and place in the cosmic order. In the modern world, where technology is developing at dizzying speed, and social and environmental crises follow one another, ancient prophecies acquire a new resonance. They remind us of the cyclical nature of history, that many of the challenges we face today have already been encountered by our ancestors in different forms. The Vatican, while preserving its role as a guardian of traditions, simultaneously evolves, adapting to a changing world. Perhaps it is in this dual status, as a bridge between the past and the future, that its true significance for world culture lies. The mystery of the Sibylline Library, like other great historical enigmas, continues to inspire researchers, writers, and dreamers. It reminds us that not everything in this world can be measured and catalogued, that some questions must remain open, prompting each new generation to seek their own answers. Ultimately, perhaps it is not so important whether ancient scrolls with prophecies of the future physically exist. Far more significant is that the very idea of prophetic knowledge continues to live in our collective imagination, reminding us of the deep connection between humanity's past, present, and future.